First, I'm just really glad everybody's here today. It's rare and wonderful that we have a room filled with early childhood advocates here in Springfield, and so it's a pleasure to see everybody. I'm going to be giving just a brief legislative update, so we're going to jump into it. As Representative Welch said earlier, this year we face a really daunting challenge. If you all remember, in 2011, the state passed a temporary income tax increase that expires at the end of the year. Because of this, Illinois faces a $2 billion revenue shortfall, and if it's left unaddressed, the sunset could impact both human services and education to the tune of $700 million worth of cuts to human services, $900 million worth of cuts to the education budget. And that's just for this next fiscal year, FY15. In FY16, we could see something as high as $4 billion worth of cuts. So we came here today to say that that simply can't happen. Today, we want to ask you all to ask your lawmakers to find the needed revenue to ensure that our young children here in Illinois can continue to access the services and supports that they need to get the best start in life. And that's just not for the upcoming fiscal year, but that's for years in the future. So we see the only real solution is maintaining the current tax rates. And so we're hoping that you'll sort of push that message across once we head over to the Capitol. The choices between a really tough budget and a really progressive, forward-thinking budget became clear when the governor introduced his budget on March 26th. By law, he's required to present a budget based on legally available revenue. And so what he did was he presented two proposals. First, what he calls his not recommended budget, which is a budget that has all of the cuts to our really critical programs. And then he also proposed a recommended budget, which is a budget that reflects the right priorities in Illinois. There's a $100 million investment in early childhood as part of his Birth to Five initiative. And so I'm gonna quickly dive into a few of the specifics from that budget. If you look in your folder, there is a budget leave behind, and I actually don't have a copy of it. It is yellow or green, neon green. And so this should outline with more clarity what I'm going to talk about right here. But the first thing we're going to mention is that many of our home visiting programs here in Illinois are funded through two budget lines in the Department of Human Services. The first is Parents Too Soon, and the second is Healthy Families Illinois. And without adequate revenue, home visiting programs could be cut by as much as 24%. And that would be a serious problem. If not, that's a serious problem to begin with. There's an additional problem is that the state of Illinois has received in upwards of $31 million from the federal government, and this is new home visiting investments. And to avoid having to repay that $31 million, the state's required to maintain level funding for their current home visiting investments. And so not only would this lack of revenue trigger repayment of the federal funds, but it would also mean a significant loss in the already scarce resources. So we're asking you to ask your lawmakers today to maintain the Healthy Families and Parents Too Soon funding. This is a proposal that Governor Quinn put forth in his recommended budget, so we're just asking you to do that today. The second piece I want to talk about is the Early Childhood Block Grant, which is funded by the State Board of Ed. It supports voluntary, high-quality early childhood educational services for children birth to 5. The block grant funds the Preschool for All program. It also funds our Birth to 3 programs, the Prevention Initiative programs. Those are the ones that are operated by local school districts, and they're also operated by community-based providers. The block grant over the last 5 years has been reduced by $80 million. At the peak in FY09, we were looking at a $380 million budget, and now this year it's down to $300. Because of that, we've seen preschool enrollment fall to levels not seen since 2006. It's nearly 25,000 less children are receiving these really important services. So we're nervous that without further revenue this fiscal year, we're going to have to cut the block grant by another $18 million, so bringing it down to $282 million. Meaning thousands more children might not receive these really critical services in schools or community-based settings. So the governor, in his proposal, and the State Board of Ed has asked for a $25 million restoration to the block grant. So we're hoping you'll talk to your lawmakers today about that and ask that at least some percentage of these cuts return back to the block grant. The third issue I'm going to talk about is the Early Intervention Program. So EI is a program in the Department of Human Services that helps ensure timely and appropriate services for children from birth to 3 with diagnosed developmental delays and those at risk of delay. So we've seen over the course of the last few years that improvements to the screening processes have increased the demand for services. And so, again, without this added adequate revenue, EI could see a cut of about 16%. Similar in the recommended budget from the governor, he asked for increase of $8 million to the EI budget. And so we're also asking for an increase of $8 million to EI. So that's the third one. And then the last one I'm going to talk about is the Child Care Assistance Program. Again, the CCAP program is funded through the Department of Human Services. It's for low-income families to access to affordable childcare while they work or go to school. Recent cuts to the CCAP budget have resulted in dramatically increased copays for families and reduced income eligibility. So again, without adequate revenue, families will find it much more difficult to locate and afford care, and the quality of that care will be diminished. And so Again, this is as part of the governor's recommended budget. He asked for an increase of $166 million to the CCAP, and that's in order to invest in quality services as well as more services for families all across the state. And so we're asking you to talk to your lawmakers about the CCAP program, how important it is, and how $166 million needs to go in the next fiscal year. So the governor put out his budget proposals in March, and now the work goes to the Senate and the House. And so that's why it's really, really important, and we're so glad to see you today, because the real decisions is going to be coming from your lawmakers. And so we want to encourage you all to be brave and get out there and talk to them about why it is that we need adequate revenue to fund the programs that we care about most. So that's the last thing I'll talk about, the budget. I did want to talk about one bill that the Ounce has been supporting this year. You have a fact sheet somewhere in your folder for House Bill 4440. I don't know if it has a color or not. It's a white piece of paper, House Bill 4440. And so House Bill 4440 is a bill that we worked on in the House with Representative Linda Chapalavia. And it's a little bit complicated, but I'll try to explain it quickly. The State Board of Ed is required by statute to spend 11% of the early childhood block grant on our programs for infants and toddlers and their families. Currently, ISB is spending 14% of their money on those programs that we care about, the 0 to 3 programs. And so what House Bill 4440 does is just raises the statutory floor to current spending. So it doesn't actually change the money that's being spent today, but it protects against future percentage cuts. So we think it's a really important measure. It passed the House a few weeks ago, and it's now in the Senate, hoping to be moving today, if not today, shortly. So what we would like you all to do is talk to your senators and ask them to co-sponsor House Bill 4440. There's more detailed information there in the fact sheet. You can come see me. You can see I read it if you have questions about it. But it's a really great bill, and it's one that we've worked hard on. So again, we as Ounce staffers are around. If you have questions, we'll be there in the Capitol. If you have questions, if you need to find offices, if you need to learn how to put in a card to request to talk to your lawmaker, anything that you need help with, we're going to be around. So just flag us. And again, I just wanted to thank everybody for coming out.